Stay tuned for this video while we go through day 12 of round 11 of the Copa versus Craig Wright Satoshi identity trial and cover the two witnesses, the first witness for Copa and the all-star witness for Craig Wright, which is Stefan Matthews. And we'll give a call on the valuation on this and how it's going. Some surprise things are happening right now and some really juicy stuff on the Stefan Matthews testimony. So stay tuned. All right, so yesterday we had Mathews on the stand. Now, to give a little background with Mathews. Okay, Mathews is, again, this case, for those who are watching this for the first time, and ultimately this case is about establishing, this part of the case is about establishing the identity of the author of the Bitcoin white paper, which has now created this multi-trillion-dollar industry. Bitcoin at a $500 billion or $500 billion market cap, or BTC is that size of a market cap, and then all the other stuff that's going on, and all the companies, and so anyways, it's a big deal for the future. So the author of that white paper, could or could not be determined at the end of this case. So Stefan Matthews was a personal colleague of Dr. Wright, who's one of the parties here, who's testified on the stand now, as of yesterday, that he was handed a copy of the Bitcoin white paper prior to it being released in October 2008. He was questioned by Lord Gavin about how he knew it was August, or how did he know the time frame that it was before the white paper was released. And this is actually from Justice Mehl questioned him on this. So he says, he knew because the white paper wasn't public yet. He was certain on those grounds that it hadn't been released yet. He didn't have any specific pinpoint. It was because of this document or because of this calendar event. This season, the leaves were falling down and the sun was blazing hot outside. He didn't pin to anything like that. All right, so that definitely, Justice Mehl had the right to question on that, and all of a sudden he didn't have strong foundation on the actual seasoning that was happening there. I mean, that was ultimately the linchpin of his testimony. They were trying to discredit him on the signings, which would have been like the 2016 after Wired and Gizmodo had outed Craig Wright as Satoshi Nakamoto. The signings and discredit him on his relationship with him and how he was in charge of it, and it wasn't this other guy McGregor. They went through that extensively, So, and then also, they went through. They really spent a lot of time on Mr. Calvin Ayre, the titan of blockchain, and try to narrow in that he's the one funding this whole thing. He's the one behind all this. It's all his. That's really where they kind of wanted to go on this. And Mathews was pretty clear that he's like, no, not to my knowledge. That's not at all the case. Not even close. Oh, he explored doing it, but it's not the case, and I don't have any knowledge about it being the case. So that was about the reason they were going after that is they wanted to discredit Wright, because if he could get Mathews to say, oh yeah, it was Ayre funding this case, then Wright could be discredited, because that would because remember Wright testified that Ayre is not funding this case. All right, so that would have been a conflict in Wright's testimony if they would have been able to get him on that, and they didn't. Some of the really juicy stuff was about Christian Ager-Hanssen. He's a Norwegian Viking that comes into companies and basically does a hostile takeover, with certain organizations. He's not really a VC. He's a Viking. He's just a Viking. He's purely a Viking. And so as a Viking, that's just what he does. Is his nature. He boards the ship. He does a hostile takeover. And so that's what he did with nChain. And that what came out today. He was hired as a CEO. The testimony was that he actually came into the office in September, shredding documents, yelling at the people, telling them to believe with the security team, the staff, yelling and screaming, telling them to get out of the office and destroying files. This is like the moment before he was fired by Stefan Matthews, the board member who's basically the chairman of the board over this company nChain with all the intellectual property over this by Craig Wright. Okay, so and nChain plays a significant role. One of the things that counsel for Copa, Jonathan Hoff, was attempting to do was to get Mr. Matthews, Stefan Matthews, to admit that nChain would benefit. So he's the chairman of the board of nChain, would benefit by this case winning. And if Craig Wright was named Satoshi Nakamoto, nChain is going to really benefit. And he was really very specific and very clear at saying absolutely not. We already have this intellectual property. Whether he is or isn't, it doesn't affect the patents. They're an intellectual property company. So, and they tried to catch him up, saying, well, you're going to benefit if the price of Bitcoin BSV goes up. And then he went into some pretty clear descriptions on why Bitcoin SV it's maintained for utility. And so it is actually a purpose of utility as used on the blockchain. So it would actually harm nChain potentially if the price went up, because it would cause a greater barrier of entry for people from using it. So I thought he did a pretty good job at rebutting that evidence, or rebutting those allegations and questions from Copa. The one thing that he's wasn't crystal clear, was the white paper part. He got this white paper from Wright. He had a story. He has his briefcase. He's describing the whole scene in his office. Very clear. It's a detailed picture. But when questioned from Justice Miller, other than it being prior to it being released and him not being on the mailing list, there was a little ambiguity there. So Justice Miller also questioned about Ager-Hanssen. And so the Ager-Hanssen connection really, it seems to be coming up pretty important here. And it's interesting because now if Ager-Hanssen was coming in and raiding nChain and tearing it apart, well, first of all, what came out in testimony was that Mathews said that Ager-Hanssen was threatening him. And this is what Justice Miller asked him. He says, so Ager-Hanssen was threatening you. What type of threats was he saying? And he was being threatened from testifying in this trial, saying he's saying that he was in Ager-Hanssen at a meeting in a desk there, and Ager-Hanssen's pounding his fist on the desk and yelling in his face from 12 inches away, saying, if you go forward and testify, I'm threatening your family. I'm going to threaten your future, your livelihood, your reputation. So Justice Miller asked him about what that actually meant, and he gave some pretty specific examples. He said, well, he's already released personal information about me. He's already released personal documents from the company that were under seal and confidential. He's already released personal audio files, released them out, and potentially changed them. And one of the other things that's noticeable is that Mathews testified that there's injunctions issued against Ager-Hanssen by a court on behalf of nChain from doing such a thing. And Ager-Hanssen has failed to respond. He's not acknowledging these. So that's somewhat brought up now. The court may be able to take judicial notice, if it's directed to, of those injunctions of these other cases, and evaluate how they could apply, since now this whole Ager-Hanssen thing is questioned by the court. The court's curious as to why Ager-Hansen's threats harmed Mathews or potentially threatened him. So, and now there's injunctions to support it. In another case, the court could take notice of that. So it's, if counsel for Wright hasn't already done that, they should be requesting judicial notice on those other cases and the injunctions and the stop orders by the court for Ager-Hanssen, because that could be related somewhat, in a way, to this action. Now that the court's asked about it, Justice Miller asked about it. All right, so I can't be denied that it isn't possibly related, and it would be relevant because of the connection with Mathews being the chairman of the board for nChain. He's a witness, and his company or his entity, is he's chairman of the board of, is the one that's bringing forward these actions to stop Ager-Hanssen. So take judicial notice of that. That would be something they should do. Let's move over to Mr. Lee. All right, this is cool because we got the first witness for Copa. Jonathan Hoff brought him up, asked him if it was his document, and then all of a sudden it went over, asked him if he signed the document, if it was his signature. Then Lord Gavin, who's counsel for Wright, solicitor for Wright, came up and started questioning Mr. Lee. He's he's not from San Francisco. Okay, I gotta say, because as a native San Franciscan, Gavin Mehl, we have like a lot of pride being a San Francisco people. I don't know why it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal, but people think it is. So he's a what's called a transplant. He's in San Francisco now, and so he's there living there, and he's kind of adopted the culture. And so he's very identifiable. I saw him on the stand, and I was like, man, I think I recognize that guy. He's like, small. San Francisco's really small, so I really it looked like I recognized him. So anyways, he was he's part of looks like what's called an unincorporated association that is under the block called Spiral. Now, he was a former Google executive. He's hired basically and paid by Jack Dorsey, who's one of the Copa founding members. And he testified, Mr. Lee did, that he is a board member of Copa. Not just of Spiral, okay, but also he's a board member of Copa. So he's considered one of the parties. This Lord Gavin sounded rather shocked when he heard this because he caught himself twice in testimony saying, so you're a board member of Block. And he's thinking and that was a problem for Lord Gavin. And then he found out, and then he says, oh, correction, I'm not a board member of Block, I'm a board member of Copa. And then Lord Gavin literally is taken back. He's like, well, that's even more significant. So Lord Gavin rested pretty fast after getting it on the record, but what was some of the unique, interesting testimony? While Mr. Lee's own written statements talks about Spiral's independence. He's the head of Spiral. It looks like it's an unincorporated association. It's not a corporation. It's not a nonprofit. It's just a unincorporated, right, association. We have those in California. I'm assuming that. He didn't mention that, but I'm assuming that's what it is. So it raised some question as to his actual, potential conflict of interest in this case and assessing whether his credibility and reliability of his own testimony. So, as a board member, it seemed like he would have he would have to protect the goals and interests for Copa and consider, subconsciously his bias for his reasoning. And in a way, contradicting what he's saying on his own written testimony, saying independent. He's saying it throughout, and Lord Gavin is questioning about it multiple times. So you're saying you're independent, but you're a board member? So basically, you're one of the parties? Huh? So it's potentially self-serving and a nature of the party's own board member, and it also warrants a careful scrutinization of the by Dr. Wright's solicitors, so it seems like as an insider, Mr. Lee, he can't be reasonably assured to be impartial. His testimony would demand heavy scrutiny from Dr. Wright. Yeah, and the word is actually self-serving. It's a self-serving testimony. So again, I was rather shocked, disappointed, I say, in Copa in that case. Not that I'm just really evaluating this case. I would think they would bring forward a stronger witness than that. I'm unclear on what the purpose of that witness was, being that it was right on the record that he was a board member of Copa. I would think they would want to bring some all-star witness out right out of the gates, but maybe they're just, I was just disappointed, So today definitely goes to Wright, because Mathews, he's strong. He's strong. He could have been stronger, of course, with this element of getting the Bitcoin white paper prior to it being released. He could have been more clear. Perhaps it's in his witness statement, the actual words, and more specificity, but he could have been clearer on that. But it is there. It's testimony. He's a very, high-level business executive. He was definitely clear about being a neutral, independent party and not benefiting from the outcome of this case. And he had clear justification as to why. So that definitely was a witness that goes to Wright. And I don't see how Lee in any way is going to support Copa. I would see if there's got to be a procedure here that Dr. Wright's counsel, Lord Gavin, is going to bring forward and strike him or his credibility, because he's looks like a self-serving witness. He's just part of Copa, and what he says is going to be on those interests only. So he couldn't deny it. He's a direct board member of Copa. And of course, the big one is the Ager-Hanssen. That's just a big, rather surprise in this case. And so, if I were on the right side, I would be, I don't know if I would be getting the court to take judicial notice of those other cases. If I were, on the right side and getting those cases, finding the injunctions that have been issued against Ager-Hanssen, getting them before the court, asking the court to take notice of them because the court asked about them. He asked about what happened. It's a wide open for that right now. Take notice of what happened with Ager-Hanssen. What has the other court said, to stop him from doing? So it's clearly already been adjudicated. He's got a temporary injunction or temporary restraining order, and potentially become a permanent injunction, which is an equitable remedy, which tells him to stop doing that. All right, like, comment, and subscribe. All right, share the video. Get the word out there. I will put a hand cash link in the description below if you want to send BSV tips. Thank you for everyone who've done that. I'm so graciously to all the people in the community out there. Jack Pitts is coming up. Connor Murphy. Check out the playlist here at the end of this video. See you at the top.